The wrench slipped from Maya Torres's hand and clattered against the helicopter's deck plating. She cursed under her breath and retrieved it, wiping the hydraulic fluid from her fingers onto her already stained flight suit. The Black Hawk's transmission housing gaped open before her, exposing the intricate network of gears and shafts that kept the aircraft airborne. She had been elbow-deep in this particular bird for 3 hours now, and the sun hammering down on the flight line was making the metal hot enough to burn. She heard them before she saw them. Boots on concrete. The distinctive sound of operators moving with purpose. Maya glanced down from her position on the maintenance platform and watched the SEAL team cross the tarmac toward the ready room. Lieutenant Commander Garrett led the pack, his desert tan uniform crisp despite the heat. His team followed in loose formation, weapons slung, their bearing unmistakable even from distance. Garrett slowed as he passed beneath her platform. He looked up, squinting against the sun. "You planning to have that bird ready any time this decade, Torres?" Maya kept her voice level. "Be done in 2 hours, sir. Transmission's got metal shavings in the oil. You don't want to be in the air when it seizes." Garrett exchanged a look with the operator beside him, a thick-necked chief petty officer named Hoskins. Hoskins smirked. "That's why we leave the mechanical work to the mechanics," he said. "We'll stick to the real operations." The rest of the team chuckled as they continued toward the ready room. Maya watched them go, her jaw tight. She had heard variations of that comment for 8 years now, across 3 deployments and half a dozen forward operating bases. The line between support personnel and combat operators might as well have been carved in stone. It did not matter that she had been in more firefights than some of those SEALs. It did not matter that she had pulled a wounded pilot from a burning cockpit under small arms fire in Helmand Province. She worked with wrenches instead of rifles, so she was just a mechanic. Maya returned her attention to the transmission, forcing herself to focus on the work. The metal shavings told a story if you knew how to read it. Bearing wear. Maybe 60 hours before catastrophic failure. She had flagged it in a maintenance log 3 days ago, but the ops tempo on this FOB had everyone pushing equipment past safe limits. They needed every aircraft in the air. The sound of rotors drew her attention. A Chinook was inbound from the north, its twin rotors beating the air into submission as it approached the landing pad. Maya watched it settle onto the concrete, its ramp already lowering before the wheels touched down. A fire team of Marines jogged out, their faces dust-caked and exhausted. Another patrol coming home. Another crew that would need their bird turned around for the next mission. Chief Warrant Officer Dixon appeared at the base of her platform. The senior pilot was in his late 40s, with silver creeping into his hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent 20 years behind a cyclic stick. He climbed up to her level and surveyed the open transmission housing. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad enough that I am not signing off on this bird until I replace the bearing assembly. Could go another 50, 60 hours. Could seize up tomorrow." Dixon nodded slowly. "Garrett's team is wheels up in 6 hours. They are counting on this aircraft for extraction. Then they better hope their primary stays healthy, because this one is not going anywhere today." Dixon studied her for a moment. "You know how it works out here, Torres. Mission tempo does not stop for maintenance windows." Maya met his eyes. "And maintenance does not stop for mission tempo, sir. That is why I am the one with the wrench, and you're the one with the flight controls. I tell you when it is safe to fly. You decide if you're willing to risk it anyway." She watched Dixon process that. He was old school, the kind of pilot who had learned to fly when helicopters were less forgiving and margins for error were measured in seconds instead of minutes. He understood the mechanical reality, even if he did not like the operational consequences. "All right," he said finally. "I will let Garrett know his backup bird just became his primary. But Torres, next time you spot something like this, flag it earlier. We cannot afford to lose aircraft over preventable failures." She wanted to point out that she had flagged it 3 days ago, that her maintenance report had been sitting in his inbox since Tuesday, that maybe if the pilots actually read the reports instead of just checking the red X green, the 10 status, they would know which birds were on borrowed time. But Dixon was already climbing down from the platform, and she had learned years ago that arguing with warrant officers was like arguing with the weather. Pointless and exhausting. Maya pulled out her phone and checked the time. If she worked through lunch, she could have the bearing replaced by 1,500 hours. That would give maintenance control time to run a test flight before sunset. Another 12-hour day in a string of 12-hour days that stretched back to the moment her boots hit the ground at this FOB 3 months ago. She thought about where she had been a year ago, stationed in Germany, working on aircraft in a climate-controlled hangar, going home every night to an actual apartment with actual furniture. Some of her friends from back home thought she had it rough, deployed to some dusty corner of the Middle East fixing helicopters while people shot at each other outside the wire. They had no idea how much worse it could be. She had seen worse, done worse. This was easy by comparison, even if the SEALs walking past her platform every day did not believe it. The thought made her wonder where those friends were right now. Probably somewhere comfortable, maybe watching the news with a beer in hand, shaking their heads at whatever was happening overseas. It was funny how perspective worked. What seemed unbearable to someone sitting in air conditioning barely registered as hardship when you were the one doing it. Maya grabbed a socket wrench from her tool bag and went back to work. The transmission housing was not going to fix itself, and Garrett's team was not going to wait for her convenience. She had 2 hours to make this bird airworthy. Time to earn her keep. The bearing assembly came out in pieces, which told Maya everything she needed to know about how close this bird had been to killing someone. She laid the fragments on a clean rag and photographed them with her phone, adding the images to her maintenance log. Documentation might not stop people from ignoring her warnings, but at least it would cover her when the investigation board came asking questions after a crash. She was installing the replacement bearing when Captain Reeves appeared at the edge of the flight line. The FOB commander was an infantry officer who had somehow ended up running a forward operating base that existed primarily to support aviation operations. He seemed perpetually uncomfortable with the fact that helicopters were more complicated than trucks and could not be fixed by yelling at them. Torres, he called up to her. Got a minute? Maya did not stop working. Not really, sir. This bird needs to be ready in 90 minutes. Reeves climbed onto the platform anyway. He watched her work for a moment, his expression suggesting he had no idea what he was looking at. I just got off call with battalion. They are pushing up Garrett's timeline. Wants his team wheels up in 4 hours instead of 6. Then they better have their primary bird in good shape, because this one is not going to be ready. Reeves shifted his weight. How not ready are we talking? I am replacing a bearing that was about 20 hours from catastrophic failure. Even if I get it installed in the next hour, we still need a test flight and a post-flight inspection. That is another 2 hours minimum. Can we skip the test flight? Maya stopped working and looked at him. You want to skip the test flight on a transmission that just had a major bearing replaced? Sir, with respect, that is how you turn a $10 million helicopter into a $10 million hole in the ground. Reeves frowned. I am not asking you to sign off on unsafe aircraft, Torres. I am asking if there is any way to compress the timeline. Not without accepting risk that I am not qualified to accept. That is why we have test pilots. The captain rubbed his face. Garrett is not going to be happy about this. Garrett's happiness is not my responsibility, sir. Getting aircraft back in the air safely is. Reeves opened his mouth to respond, but whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the sound of rotors spooling up across the flight line. They both turned to watch as a Black Hawk lifted off from the primary pad, its nose dipping forward as it accelerated away from the FOB. Maya recognized the tail number. That was Garrett's primary extraction bird, heading out for a pre-mission check flight. At least someone is following procedure, she muttered. Reeves gave her a look that suggested he did not appreciate the commentary. He climbed down from the platform without another word, leaving Maya alone with her tools and her half-assembled transmission. She finished installing the bearing and was torquing down the housing bolts when she heard footsteps on the platform again. She assumed it was Reeves coming back to argue, but when she looked up she found herself facing Garrett himself. The SEAL officer had changed into his mission kit, plate carrier loaded with magazines and equipment. He looked every inch the operator, from his suppressed rifle to the night vision mount on his helmet. Heard you grounded my backup bird, he said. I grounded a helicopter with a failing transmission bearing. The fact that it happens to be your backup is coincidental. Garrett stepped closer, studying the open transmission housing. How long until it's ready? 2 hours if the test flight goes clean. 3 if we find additional issues. My team launches in 4 hours. We need a backup bird. Then I suggest you take very good care of your primary, because this one is not going to be available. Garrett's jaw tightened. You understand what we're doing out there, Torres? We're not flying supply runs. Lives depend on having backup assets available. Maya set down her torque wrench and met his eyes. Lives also depend on helicopters not falling out of the sky because someone pushed a broken bird into service. I have seen what happens when transmission seize at altitude. It is not pretty and it is not survivable. That is why we have pilots who know how to handle emergencies. Emergencies you can handle. Mechanical failures you cannot. There is a difference. Garrett studied her for a long moment. His expression suggested he was trying to decide whether she was being deliberately difficult or just competent enough to be annoying. He said finally, for someone who spends all day turning wrenches, you seem to have a lot of opinions about combat operations. For someone who spends all day kicking down doors, you seem to have a lot of opinions about helicopter maintenance. The SEAL operator's eyes narrowed. Careful, Staff Sergeant. Maya held his gaze. I'm being careful, sir. That is literally my job. Making sure aircraft are safe to fly so that operators like you can focus on the mission instead of worrying about whether your ride home is going to stay in the air. Garrett opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the radio on his belt crackled to life. It was his second in command, a senior chief named Brennan, requesting him back at the team room for final mission brief. Garrett keyed his radio to acknowledge, then looked back at Maya. 2 hours, he said. Not 3. We need options. I will have it done when I have it done, Commander. Rushing maintenance is how people die. Garrett held her gaze for another beat, then turned and walked away. Maya watched him go, then returned her attention to the transmission. She had another 40 minutes of work before she could even think about buttoning it up for testing, and Garrett's attitude was not going to make the bolts turn any faster. She thought about what Hoskins had said earlier. Leave the real operations to the operators, as if flying into hot zones and pulling trigger was somehow more real than keeping the machines running that made those operations possible. Maya had been on plenty of operations. She had seen combat up close, had returned fire, had dragged wounded soldiers to safety while rounds snapped past her head. The fact that she had done it while wearing a flight suit instead of multicam did not make it any less real. But that was the thing about forward operating bases. Everyone had their role, and everyone stayed in their lane. The operators operated. The pilots flew. The mechanics fixed. And nobody crossed those invisible lines, even when they had the skills to do it. Maya had learned to live with that reality a long time ago. It still annoyed her, but she had learned to live with it. She finished torquing the last bolt and started reassembling the transmission housing. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory, guiding each movement. This was her third deployment as an aviation mechanic, and she had worked on more helicopters than she could count. She knew these machines better than most pilots, understood their quirks and limits and breaking points. That knowledge had kept a lot of people alive over the years, whether they acknowledged it or not. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when she finally closed up the housing and climbed down from the platform. Her back ached, and her hands were stained with hydraulic fluid and grease. She found Dixon in the operations shack and told him the bird was ready for test flight. He nodded and said he would get a pilot on it within the hour. Maya walked back to the maintenance bay and cleaned her tools, checking each one before returning it to her kit. Proper tool discipline was one of those things that separated good mechanics from dangerous ones. Lose track of a socket wrench, and it might end up in an engine intake. Leave a screwdriver in a rotor housing, and it might jam the swash plate. Attention to detail was not optional in this line of work. By the time she finished cleaning up, the test pilot was airborne in her repaired Black Hawk. Maya stood on the flight line and watched the helicopter run through its paces, listening to the sound of the rotors and the transmission. Everything sounded clean, smooth, the way it was supposed to sound. She had done her job right, and in a few hours, that bird would be available for whatever mission required it. Whether Garrett appreciated that or not was his problem. The mission brief happened without her, which was exactly how these things always went. Maya learned the details secondhand from one of the crew chiefs who had been in the room. High-value target extraction. Somewhere across the border in territory that officially did not exist on any map the American public ever saw. Garrett's team would insert at dusk, move to the target compound under cover of darkness, extract the package, and be back at the FOB before sunrise. Standard work for SEALs, assuming everything went according to plan. Maya was in the maintenance bay, running diagnostics on a Chinook, when the Black Hawks spooled up for departure. She glanced through the open bay door and watched Garrett's team load into their primary bird. The rotors were already turning, the distinctive whop, whop, whop of the blades cutting through the evening air. Hoskins was the last one aboard, his rifle held at low ready as he climbed into the cargo bay. The crew chief gave the pilots a thumbs up and the helicopter lifted off, banking east as it climbed away from the FOB. Dixon appeared beside her, watching the departure. His expression was unreadable in the fading light. "Your bird passed the test flight clean," he said. "We have it on standby as backup." "Good." Maya turned back to her diagnostic computer. "Hopefully they will not need it." "Hopefully." Dixon lingered for a moment longer, then walked away. Maya returned her attention to the Chinook's fuel system, but part of her mind was still tracking the mission timeline. 30 minutes to the insert point. 2 hours on the ground. 30 minutes back. If everything went smoothly, Garrett would be back by midnight. She finished the diagnostics and moved on to the next aircraft in the maintenance queue. A little bird that needed its tail rotor gearbox inspected. The work was methodical and consuming, requiring enough focus that she could almost forget about the mission happening somewhere beyond the wire. Almost. At 2100 hours, Maya was signing off on the little bird when she heard raised voices from the operations shack. She set down her clipboard and walked over, arriving just as Reeves emerged with his radio pressed to his ear. His face was tight with stress. "What happened?" Maya asked. Reeves held up a hand, listening to whoever was on the other end of the radio. When he finally responded, his voice was clipped. "Understood. Keep me updated." He lowered the radio and looked at Maya. "Garrett's primary bird is experiencing mechanical issues. They are RTB for aircraft swap." "What kind of issues?" "Engine trouble. One of the turbines is running hot. Pilots are worried about flameout." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Which engine?" "Number 2. Did they hit it with small arms fire?" Reeves shook his head. "No contact. Just started running hot about 20 minutes into the flight." Maya was already moving toward the operations shack. She pushed through the door and found the duty officer monitoring radio traffic. "How hot are we talking?" she asked. The duty officer checked his notes. 700 degrees, over normal operating temp, and climbing. "Pilots aborted the insert and are heading back now. ETA, 15 minutes. Maya pulled out her phone and opened her maintenance logs, scrolling back through the records for Garrett's primary bird. She found what she was looking for in an entry from 4 days ago. There it was. A note about elevated exhaust gas temperatures on engine number 2 during a routine flight. The pilot had reported it, but maintenance had cleared it after running diagnostics that showed everything within acceptable parameters. Sometimes engines ran a little hot. Usually it was nothing. Except this time it was not nothing. She closed her phone and looked at Reeves. "When they land, I need to inspect that engine before anyone signs off on them, taking the backup bird." The captain frowned. "We do not have time for a full inspection, Torres. They need to get back in the air. Then they take my bird and I inspect theirs while they are gone. But someone needs to figure out what is causing that temperature spike before it turns into an actual flameout." Reeves considered this. "Fine, but make it quick. Garrett is going to want wheels up again within the hour." Maya nodded and headed back to the flight line. She could already hear the returning Black Hawk, its rotors beating the air as it approached from the east. The helicopter came in fast, flaring hard as it settled onto the primary pad. The crew chief was out before the wheels touched down, running toward the operations shack. Maya grabbed her tool bag and jogged over to the aircraft. The pilots were already shutting down the engines, going through their emergency procedures. She waited until the rotors stopped spinning, then climbed up to inspect engine number 2. The cowling was hot to the touch, even through her gloves. She popped the access panels and shone her flashlight into the engine compartment. At first glance, everything looked normal. No visible damage. No fluid leaks. But when she checked the fuel nozzles, she found what she was looking for. One of the nozzles was partially clogged, restricting fuel flow and causing an uneven burn pattern. It was the kind of problem that could be fixed with a cleaning and replacement, but it would take time. Garrett appeared at the base of the aircraft. His face was set in hard lines. How long to fix it? Maya climbed down. At least 2 hours. Maybe 3. I need to pull the fuel nozzle assembly and clean the entire fuel manifold. We do not have 3 hours. The window for this mission closes at 2300. Then you take the backup bird. But this aircraft is not going anywhere until I fix this fuel system. Garrett stared at her. You are sure? Maya met his gaze. Commander, if you try to fly this bird with a clogged fuel nozzle, you're going to flame out that engine. And if you flame out at altitude in hostile territory, you're not coming home. So yes, I am sure. For a moment, she thought he might argue. But then Brennan, his second-in-command, stepped up beside him. She is right, boss. We cannot risk the primary. We go with the backup. Garrett's jaw worked. He looked at the disabled helicopter, then back at Maya. Fine. But if that backup bird has any issues, Torres, any issues at all, we're going to have a conversation. The backup will be fine. I just rebuilt the transmission myself. Garrett turned away without responding. Maya watched him gather his team and move toward her freshly repaired Black Hawk. Dixon was already there with the pilots, doing a quick pre-flight brief. Within minutes, the SEAL team was loading up again, moving with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this 1,000 times before. Maya stood on the flight line and watched them lift off. The Black Hawk climbed smoothly, its turbines humming with the clean sound of properly maintained machinery. She had done her job. The bird was solid. Whatever happened from here was out of her hands. But as she watched the helicopter disappear into the darkness, she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not with the aircraft. The aircraft was fine. But something about this mission fell off in a way she could not quite articulate. Maybe it was just fatigue. Maybe it was the stress of the rush timeline. Or maybe it was the instinct that came from spending too many years in places where things went wrong fast and without warning. She turned back to the disabled primary and got to work on the fuel system. Garrett would want this bird ready when he got back, and she still had several hours of work ahead of her. The night was going to be long, and something told her it was about to get longer. Maya had the fuel manifold disassembled on a clean tarp when the first radio call came in. She was inspecting each nozzle under a work light, checking for carbon buildup and wear patterns, when she heard Reeve shouting from the operations shack. Her instincts kicked in before her brain caught up. She dropped the part she was holding and ran. The operations shack was packed with people when she arrived. Reeve stood at the radio console with the duty officer, both of them hunched over the speaker. Dixon was there too, along with the senior enlisted advisor and several other officers Maya did not recognize. Everyone's face carried the same expression. Something had gone very wrong. What happened? Maya asked. Reeves held up a hand for silence. The radio crackled with static, then a voice cut through. Broken and urgent. 3-7, this is Reaper 6. Actual, we are taking heavy fire. I say again, heavy fire. We have casualties, and the bird is down. Maya felt her stomach drop. That was Garrett's voice. The duty officer keyed his mic. Reaper 6, this is 3-7 copy. Your last say, status of aircraft. More static. Then Garrett again. Aircraft is down hard. Both pilots Kia took an RPG to the tail rotor on approach. We went in hard, multiple injuries, attempting to establish perimeter, but we are surrounded. Request immediate QRF and CAS danger close. The room erupted into activity. Reeves was already pulling up maps on the computer screen, plotting coordinates. Dixon grabbed another radio and started coordinating with the quick reaction force. The senior enlisted advisor was on a phone to battalion headquarters. Everyone moving with practiced crisis management protocols. Maya stood frozen, replaying Garrett's words in her head. Both pilots Kia. The bird is down. Her bird. The helicopter she had personally rebuilt. The transmission she had replaced herself. Gone. and 8 men trapped in hostile territory with no way out. "How far to the crash site?" she asked. Dixon glanced at her. 30 kilometers across the border. "We have the QRF spooling up now, but it will take them 40 minutes minimum to get there." 40 minutes is too long, Maya said. "If they're surrounded, they might not have 40 minutes. Dixon's expression hardened. "We are moving as fast as we can, Torres. Go back to your maintenance work and let us handle this." She wanted to argue, but knew it would be pointless. This was operator business now. Command and control. Tactical decision-making. The mechanics were not part of that conversation. She backed out of the operations shack and returned to the disabled Black Hawk, but her mind was not on fuel nozzles anymore. Both pilots dead. That meant the aircraft had gone down hard. Probably auto-rotated most of the way, but without tail rotor control, Garrett's pilot would have been fighting just to keep the aircraft from spinning out of control before impact. Maya had seen helicopter crashes before, had pulled bodies from wreckage. The fact that anyone survived meant the pilot had done something right in those final seconds. She forced herself to focus on the fuel system. The nozzles were fouled with carbon deposits, exactly as she had suspected. She grabbed a wire brush and started cleaning them one by one, but her ears were tuned to the operations shack and the radio chatter spilling out through the open door. The QRF launched 15 minutes later. 2 Black Hawks and a pair of Apache attack helicopters for cover. Maya watched them lift off into the night, their navigation lights disappearing quickly as they raced east. She went back to work on the fuel system, her hands moving automatically while her mind tracked the timeline. 30 minutes to the crash site. Unknown time to establish landing zone and extract the team. 30 minutes back. Best case scenario, Garrett and his men would be back at the FOB in 90 minutes. But Maya had learned a long time ago that best-case scenarios rarely survived contact with reality. She was reinstalling the cleaned fuel nozzles when the second radio call came through. This time she did not run to the operations shack. She could hear Reeves clearly from where she was working. The QRF had reached the crash site perimeter but could not get in. Enemy forces had established fighting positions around the downed helicopter with heavy weapons. The Apaches were engaging targets, but the concentration of anti-aircraft fire was too intense. One of the Apaches had already taken damage and was pulling back. The QRF commander was requesting artillery support and additional air assets, but the approval process for cross-border fire missions was measured in hours, not minutes. Maya set down her tools and walked to the edge of the flight line. She could see officers gathering near the operations shack, their body language tense. This was turning into a clusterfuck, the kind that ended with congressional inquiries and medals awarded posthumously. She thought about Garrett and his team pinned down in the wreckage. Ammunition running low. Casualties mounting, waiting for a rescue that might not come in time. They were operators, the elite. But elite did not mean invincible, and being surrounded by hostiles and enemy territory was as close to invincible as you could get before the universe reminded you otherwise. Dixon found her 20 minutes later. His face was drawn. "The QRF cannot reach them," he said. "Too much ground fire. We're working on alternate extraction plans, but nothing is looking good right now." "What about air assets?" Maya asked. "Fast movas? Gunships?" Everything that can fly is either already there or too far away to help in time. Dixon rubbed his face. "The reality is we might be looking at a recovery operation instead of a rescue." Maya felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. "You mean body retrieval?" Dixon did not answer, which was answer enough. She looked across the flight line at the rows of aircraft. Blackhawks and Chinooks and Little Birds. Millions of dollars worth of machinery sitting idle while 8 men died 30 kilometers away because nobody could figure out how to reach them. It seemed wrong on a fundamental level, like having fire extinguishers mounted to the wall while watching a building burn because nobody wanted to break the glass to get them down. Her eyes settled on something at the far end of the flight line. A civilian helicopter that had been impounded 3 weeks ago after being caught flying supplies to a questionable destination. It was an old Huey Vietnam era, the kind of aircraft that should have been in a museum but was somehow still flying. The bird had been sitting under a tarp waiting for some bureaucrat to decide its fate. Maya walked toward it. Dixon followed. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She pulled back the tarp and studied the aircraft. The Huey was in rough shape, but not unflyable. She had walked past it a dozen times and done a quick visual inspection out of professional curiosity. The airframe was solid. The engine looked serviceable. It would need fuel and a pre-flight check, but the bones were good. "I am thinking that helicopter does not have any official flight status," Maya said, "which means it does not officially exist, which means nobody would notice if it disappeared for a few hours." Dixon stared at her. "You cannot be serious. That bird can fly low, under radar coverage. The enemy is not looking for civilian aircraft, because civilian aircraft are not supposed to be operating in this area. I could get to the crash site before the QRF figures out how to breach the perimeter." Dixon shook his head. "You are a mechanic, Torres, not a pilot, not an operator. You will be flying into a hot LZ with no support and no authorization. I am a mechanic who spent 4 years as a crew chief on medevac birds in Afghanistan. I know how to fly. I know how to handle myself under fire. And I know that Garrett and his team are going to die if someone does not do something right now." Dixon looked at the Huey, then back at Maya. "Even if I agreed to this insane plan, which I do not, Reeves would never authorize it. Then we do not tell Reeves until it is too late to stop me." The warrant officer studied her face. She could see him weighing the options, running the calculations. Command would crucify him if this went wrong. But Command would crucify everyone if those SEALs died, because nobody was willing to take a risk. Finally, Dixon nodded. "You have 2 hours. If you're not back by then, I'm telling Reeves everything and letting him decide whether to court-martial me or give me a medal." Maya pulled the tarp completely off the Huey and started her pre-flight inspection. The helicopter was older than she was, a UH-1H that had probably seen service in half a dozen conflicts before ending up on the gray market. The exterior was painted in faded civilian colors, white and blue with no military markings. Perfect for what she had in mind. Dixon watched her work, his arms crossed. "You really think this rust bucket will make it 30 kilometers and back?" Maya ran her hand along the airframe, checking for structural damage. "The bones are good. Engine looks solid. Fuel system is intact." She climbed up to inspect the rotor head. "Someone has been maintaining this bird better than its appearance suggests." "That does not answer my question. It will fly. Whether it flies well enough for what we need to do is something I will find out when I am in the air." Dixon shook his head, but moved to help her. They worked quickly, removing tied downs and chocks, checking fuel levels and control systems. The Huey had maybe 2 hours of fuel in the tanks, enough to get there and back with minimal reserve. Maya opened the engine cowling and did a rapid inspection of the turbine, looking for obvious problems. Everything looked serviceable. She found a headset in the cargo bay and tested the radio. It worked but was set to civilian frequencies. She would be flying without contact to the FOB, which meant nobody could call her back once she launched. Dixon handed her a military radio from his kit. "Take this," he said. "At least I can talk to you, even if Reeves cannot." Maya clipped the radio to her belt and climbed into the pilot's seat. The cockpit smelled like old hydraulic fluid and decades of accumulated grime. The instruments were analog, the kind she had trained on before the Army switched to glass cockpits and digital displays. She ran through the start sequence from memory, her hands moving over switches and controls with practiced familiarity. The turbine spooled up with a whine that gradually built into a roar. The rotor blades began turning, slowly at first, then faster as the engine reached operating speed. Maya watched the gauges climb into the green. Oil pressure good. Turbine temp normal. Rotor RPM coming up to range. The helicopter shuddered and creaked but held together. Dixon stood clear of the rotor disc, his face illuminated by the red glow of the position lights. His expression was somewhere between resignation and respect. Maya gave him a thumbs up. He returned it, then turned and walked quickly toward the operations shack. She had maybe 5 minutes before someone noticed what was happening and tried to stop her. She pulled collective, and the Huey lifted off, nose dipping forward as she added cyclic input. The helicopter responded sluggishly, but predictably. The flight controls were heavier than the Black Hawks she was used to, requiring more muscle to move the cyclic and pedals. But she had flown worse aircraft in worse conditions. This would work. Maya turned east and accelerated away from the FOB, dropping to low altitude as she cleared the perimeter. She flew without navigation lights, using night vision goggles borrowed from Dixon's kit. The terrain below was dark and featureless, broken only by the occasional compound or vehicle track. She kept the Huey low, using terrain masking to stay off radar. At this altitude and speed, she was invisible to most detection systems. Just another aircraft in a region full of aircraft, indistinguishable from the cargo helicopters and charter flights that moved through this airspace every day. The radio crackled. Dixon's voice came through. "Torres, you are clear of FOB airspace. Reeves just figured out what you did. He is not happy. Tell him I will apologize when I get back. If you get back." Dixon paused. "The crash site is hot, Maya. QRF reports at least 40 hostiles with heavy weapons. You fly into that, and you might not fly out." Noted. "How long until the QRF can breach the perimeter?" "Unknown. They're still taking fire and cannot get close enough to establish landing zone." Maya checked her heading and airspeed. She was making good time. The Huey was not fast, but it was steady, eating up the distance with the single-minded determination of old machinery that refused to quit. "Then I guess I better get there before they run out of ammunition." The radio went silent. Maya focused on flying, her attention split between the instruments and the terrain rushing past below. She was violating about a dozen regulations and probably committing several court-martial offenses. But regulations and courts-martial were problems for later. Right now, the only problem that mattered was getting to those SEALs before they died. She crossed the border 15 minutes into the flight. There was no visible marker, just an invisible line on maps that separated one country from another. Out here in the dark, it all looked the same. Desert and rock and the occasional cluster of lights marking a village or compound. Maya wondered how many people down there were enemies and how many were just trying to survive in a region that had been at war longer than she had been alive. The crash site appeared on the horizon as a faint glow. Tracer fire arced through the darkness, red lines that marked the positions of the hostile forces surrounding Garrett's downed helicopter. Maya could see muzzle flashes from at least a dozen locations, forming a rough circle around the wreckage. The QRF Black Hawks were holding position 3 kilometers out, their Apaches making gun runs, but unable to suppress all the ground fire. Maya keyed her radio. "Dixon, this is Torres. I have visual on crash site. Hostiles are concentrated on the north and west sides. I'm going to approach from the south." "Negative, Torres. The south approach puts you directly in line with enemy positions. You'll be flying through their field of fire. I am in a civilian helicopter with no military markings, flying at low altitude. They're not expecting me, and they're focused on the QRF. I will be in and out before they figure out what is happening. That is assuming they do not just shoot you anyway because you're a helicopter in a combat zone." Maya dropped lower, bringing the Huey down until she was barely 50 feet above the desert floor. Calculated risk. Now, radio silence until I call for extraction. She switched off her radio before Dixon could argue further. The crash site was 2 kilometers ahead. She could see the wreckage now, the downed Black Hawk lying on its side with one rotor blade snapped off. Figures moved around the helicopter, muzzle flashes showing where Garrett and his team were returning fire. The SEAL team had established a defensive perimeter using the wreckage as cover, but they were clearly outnumbered and running out of options. Maya lined up her approach from the south, staying low and fast. The Huey rattled and shook as she pushed the airspeed toward Redline. The old helicopter was not designed for this kind of flying, but it held together, its engine howling as she demanded everything it had. Tracer fire suddenly lit up the night ahead of her. Someone had spotted the Huey and opened fire. Rounds snapped past the cockpit, some close enough that Maya heard them over the rotor noise. She jinked left then right, throwing the helicopter into evasive maneuvers that made the airframe groan in protest. More tracer fire, this time from a different angle. The hostiles were reacting faster than she had expected. A round punched through the windscreen, and Maya felt something hot graze her shoulder. She ignored it and focused on flying. The crash site was 500 meters ahead. 400. 300. She could see faces now in the wreckage. Garrett and his men looking up at the unexpected arrival of a civilian helicopter diving toward them through a storm of gunfire. Maya flared hard, bleeding off airspeed as she brought the Huey into a hover 20 meters from the downed Black Hawk. The landing zone was rough, scattered with debris and loose rock, but she set the skids down as gently as the circumstances allowed. Before the helicopter was fully settled, she was already shouting into her headset. "Garrett, if you can hear me, you have 30 seconds to get your people on this bird before I leave with or without you." She did not know if he could hear her, did not know if they even had compatible radios. But it did not matter because Garrett was already moving, his team forming up and moving toward the Huey in a tactical formation even as they continued returning fire. Maya counted them as they climbed aboard. 6 men. Then 7. Where was the 8th? Garrett appeared at the pilot door, his face streaked with blood and dust. "Brennan is Kia," he shouted over the rotor noise. "Everyone else is accounted for. Get us out of here." Maya pulled collective, and the Huey lifted off, rounds hitting the fuselage as the hostiles concentrated their fire on the escaping helicopter. She pushed the nose over and accelerated away from the crash site, flying so low that dust and debris kicked up by the rotor wash obscured her vision. More tracer fire chased them, but she was already too far and too fast for accurate targeting. The crash site fell away behind them, and Maya finally allowed herself to breathe. The Huey shuddered as Maya pushed it west toward the border. She could feel the controls getting heavier, the cyclic requiring more force to maintain coordinated flight. Something was wrong. The helicopter was flying, but not well. She checked the instruments and saw the engine temperature climbing steadily into the yellow range. One of those rounds had hit something important. Garrett pulled himself into the co-pilot's seat, moving stiffly. His left arm hung at an awkward angle and blood soaked through his sleeve. "How bad is it?" he asked, nodding toward the gauges. Maya adjusted the throttle, trying to keep the engine temperature from climbing into the red. "Bad enough. We took hits to the engine compartment. I am losing power and oil pressure is dropping. Can you make it back to the FOB? Not at this altitude. I need to climb to get over the ridgeline ahead, but climbing will push the engine temp even higher. If we do not climb, we hit the ridge. If we climb, the engine might flame out." Garrett looked at her. "Those are both bad options. Welcome to aviation." Maya scanned the terrain ahead. The ridgeline was 3 kilometers out, a dark mass rising against the slightly less dark sky. She did not have many choices. Best case, we make it over the ridge, and I can auto-rotate down the far side if the engine quits. Worst case, we hit the ridge and find out how good this airframe is at withstanding impact. What is the middle case? There is no middle case. That is why I said best and worst. Garrett almost smiled at that. Then he keyed his radio to check in with his surviving team members in the cargo bay. Maya focused on coaxing the dying helicopter toward the ridge. The engine temperature continued climbing. 800 degrees. 900. 1,000. She was well past safe operating limits now and pushing into territory where catastrophic failure was measured in seconds, not minutes. The Huey crossed the border and started climbing toward the ridge. Maya pulled every bit of power she could from the failing engine, nursing it like a wounded animal that might quit at any moment. The helicopter gained altitude in stuttering increments, each foot of climb costing her airspeed and stability. She could feel the vibrations through the cyclic getting worse as the engine struggled. 200 meters from the ridge, the oil pressure warning light illuminated. Maya swore and reduced collective slightly, trading altitude for reduced engine load. The warning light stayed on. She was losing oil fast, which meant she was losing lubrication, which meant the engine was going to seize. It was just a question of when. 100 meters from the ridge. The Huey was barely climbing now, the engine screaming in protest as Maya demanded power it no longer had to give. Garrett sat silent beside her, his good hand gripping the edge of his seat. Behind him, the cargo bay was quiet. Everyone knew what was about to happen. 50 meters. Maya could see individual rocks on the ridgeline now, could see the sparse vegetation clinging to the slope. The Huey shuddered violently, and the engine temperature spiked into the red. She pulled more collective anyway, accepting that she was probably destroying what was left of the engine for a few more seconds of flight. The helicopter cleared the ridge with maybe 10 meters to spare. Maya immediately pushed the nose over and started descending the far side, reducing power to idle. The engine was still running, but barely. She could hear metal grinding against metal, could smell burning oil. They had seconds before complete failure. "We're not going to make it back to the FOB," she said. "I need to put down somewhere close before this engine quits completely." Garrett scanned the terrain below. "There." He pointed to a flat area 2 kilometers ahead. "Old compound. Looks abandoned." Maya turned toward it. The engine coughed once, twice, then seized completely. The rotor RPM started dropping immediately. She had maybe 20 seconds before the blades slowed enough that the helicopter would fall like a rock. She pushed the nose down to maintain rotor speed, converting altitude into energy. The compound rushed up toward them faster than she wanted, but there was no choice. She flared hard at the last moment, trading airspeed for lift, and the Huey slammed onto the desert floor with enough force to collapse the left landing skid. The helicopter tilted sideways, but stayed upright. Maya secured the controls and killed the fuel. "Everyone sit still. Let me make sure we are not about to catch fire." She grabbed a fire extinguisher and climbed out of the cockpit. The engine compartment was smoking, but not burning. She could see where rounds had punched through the cowling and shredded the oil cooler. It was a miracle they had stayed in the air as long as they did. She sprayed the hot metal with extinguisher foam anyway, making sure nothing was about to ignite. Garrett and his team were already out of the helicopter, establishing security around the downed aircraft. Maya counted them again. 7 men, including Garrett. They had left Brennan behind at the first crash site. The thought sat heavy in her chest, but there had been no choice. You could not extract the dead when the living needed every second. Garrett approached her, favoring his injured arm. "How long to fix it?" Maya looked at the destroyed engine compartment. "I cannot fix this. The oil cooler is shredded and the engine is seized. This helicopter is not flying again without a complete engine replacement." So we walk 17 kilometers back to the FOB across open desert, with at least 3 of your men injured and hostiles potentially looking for us. Maya shook her head. "We need extraction." Garrett pulled out his radio and tried to reach the QRF. Static. He adjusted frequencies and tried again. More static. The ridgeline was blocking the signal. He looked at Maya. "Can you get a radio working from the helicopter?" "Maybe. The civilian radio still has power if the battery is intact. I could try to boost the signal." She climbed back into the cockpit and started working on the radio. The battery was low but functional. She pulled wire from the damaged engine compartment and rigged an improvised antenna, extending it as high as she could reach. It was not pretty, but it might work. Dixon's voice came through weak and distorted. "Torres, is that you? Say again your location." "Dixon, this is Torres. We are on the ground 17 clicks east of the FOB. Engine failure forced emergency landing. We need extraction for 8 personnel." "Copy that. Stand by." The radio went silent for several minutes. Maya waited, watching Garrett and his team maintain security around the perimeter. They moved like professionals despite their injuries, checking angles and establishing overlapping fields of fire. These were men who had survived worse situations than this. The radio crackled back to life. "Torres, we have QRF inbound to your location. ETA, 30 minutes. Be advised enemy forces are searching the area. Keep your heads down." "Understood." Maya signed off and relayed the information to Garrett. He nodded and passed it to his team. Then he returned to the helicopter and sat heavily on the cargo deck. "You know you're probably going to face disciplinary action for this," he said. Maya shrugged. "Probably. But you were alive, so it was worth it." "How did you know you could fly that thing?" "I did not. But I know helicopters, and I know how to handle aircraft that do not want to stay in the air. Sometimes that is enough." Garrett studied her face in the dim light. "I was wrong about you," he said. We all were. You're not just a mechanic. Maya met his eyes. I'm exactly a mechanic. But mechanics know how to make broken things work. That is the job. They sat in silence for several minutes. The desert was quiet except for the wind and the occasional sound of Garrett's team moving around the perimeter. Maya thought about the events of the last few hours, the impossible decisions, the calculated risks. The moment she pulled collective and committed to a plan that could have killed everyone involved. She was going to catch hell for this when she got back. Reeves would probably try to court-martial her. Command would launch investigations. There would be paperwork and statements and formal inquiries. But Garrett and 6 of his men were alive when they should have been dead. That counted for something. The QRF Blackhawks appeared 30 minutes later exactly as promised. They landed in the open area near the abandoned compound and loaded everyone aboard. Maya took one last look at the destroyed Huey sitting tilted on the desert floor. Someone would come back for it eventually, or maybe they would just leave it there as another piece of wreckage in a landscape already littered with the remains of forgotten conflicts. She climbed aboard the extraction helicopter and found a seat. Garrett was across from her, his injured arm now in a makeshift sling. He caught her eye and nodded once. She returned the gesture. No words were needed. They both understood what had happened and what it meant. The Black Hawk lifted off and turned west toward home. The Black Hawk touched down at the FOB just after 0300 hours. Maya was the last one off, her legs unsteady as she stepped onto the familiar concrete of the flight line. Medical personnel swarmed Garrett and his team, triaging injuries and loading the more serious cases onto stretchers. She watched them work, feeling the adrenaline drain from her system and leave behind bone-deep exhaustion. Reeves was waiting for her at the edge of the landing pad. His face was unreadable in the pre-dawn darkness, but his body language communicated everything she needed to know. She was in serious trouble. "My office," he said. "Now." Maya followed him across the compound to the operations building. Other personnel watched them pass, word having already spread about what had happened. She could see the reactions on their faces. Some looked impressed. Others looked shocked. A few looked like they thought she was insane. Reeves closed the office door behind them and turned to face her. He did not sit down and did not offer her a seat. "What you did tonight was reckless, unauthorized, and potentially criminal. You stole an impounded aircraft, violated numerous regulations, and flew a combat mission without clearance or support. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Maya met his eyes. "I brought back 7 men who would otherwise be dead, sir. That does not excuse what you did. We have protocols for a reason. Chain of command exists for a reason. You do not get to decide when those things apply and when they do not. With respect, Captain, those protocols were not working. The QRF could not breach the perimeter. Close air support was ineffective. Garrett and his team were going to die waiting for someone to follow proper channels and get authorization for a rescue that might never come." Reeves stepped closer. "You are a mechanic, Torres, not a pilot, not an operator. You had no business flying that mission. I am a crew chief with 4 years of combat flight experience," Maya said, keeping her voice level. "I have logged over 800 hours in helicopters, including time as acting pilot during emergency situations. I know aircraft systems better than most rated pilots because I am the one who fixes them when they break. And I made a judgment call that saved lives. A judgment call that could have gotten you killed. That could have gotten Garrett's entire team killed if that helicopter had gone down over hostile territory. But it did not. I assessed the risk and determined it was acceptable given the circumstances." Reeves shook his head. "You do not get to make that assessment. That is not your job. Maybe it should be." Maya felt her composure starting to crack. "Maybe instead of keeping mechanics in their lane and operators in their lane and pilots in their lane, we should recognize that people have skills beyond their job descriptions. Maybe we should use those skills when lives are on the line instead of worrying about who is authorized to do what." The captain stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked to his desk, leaning against it with his arms crossed. "I should court-martial you. By the book, that is exactly what I should do. You violated so many regulations tonight that I would need a legal officer just to count them all. But you're not going to." "No, I'm not going to." Because Garrett is alive. Because 6 other SEALs are alive. Because you did something that nobody else was willing or able to do. Reeves paused, but that does not mean there will not be consequences. This gets reported up the chain. Let them decide what happens to you. Understood, sir. Dismissed. Get some food and some sleep. We will sort out the paperwork later. Maya left the office and walked toward the dining facility. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, false dawn giving way to the real thing. She had not slept in nearly 24 hours and could feel the exhaustion settling into her bones. But she was not sure she could sleep even if she tried. She found Dixon in the dining facility, sitting alone with a cup of coffee. He looked up as she approached and gestured to the empty chair across from him. Heard you survived the meeting with Reeves. Barely. Maya grabbed a cup of coffee from the urn and sat down. He is reporting it up the chain. Expected. Dixon sipped his coffee. For what it is worth, I think you did the right thing. Not the smart thing or the authorized thing, but the right thing. Tell that to whoever reviews my case. I will if they ask. Dixon set down his cup. You know what the interesting part is? Nobody is questioning whether you could do it. They are just upset that you did it without permission. That tells you something about how people see you. Maya considered that. She had spent 8 years being dismissed as just a mechanic, being told to stay in her lane, being passed over for opportunities because she did not fit the narrow definition of what a combat contributor looked like. And then in one night, she had proved that all of those assumptions were wrong. The question was whether anyone would remember that or whether they would just focus on the regulatory violations. Garrett appeared in the doorway, his left arm now in a proper sling and his face cleaned of blood and dust. He spotted Maya and walked over to their table. Dixon stood to leave, but Garrett waved him back down. Stay. This involves you too. He pulled out a chair and sat heavily. The medical officer says I have a fractured ulna and significant soft tissue damage. I am grounded for at least 6 weeks. My team is being rotated back to the States for recovery and refit. He looked at Maya. We owe you our lives. All of us. I wanted to make sure you knew that. Maya did not know what to say. She settled for a simple response. You would have done the same. Maybe. But I did not. You did. Garrett leaned forward. I talked to my chain of command. Told them exactly what happened and why. I'm putting you in for a medal. Distinguished Flying Cross at minimum. You flew a combat rescue mission under fire and saved 7 personnel. That deserves recognition. Maya shook her head. I do not need a medal. I was just doing what needed to be done. The medal is not for you, Garrett said. It is for everyone who comes after you. Every mechanic or crew chief or support person who gets told they are not good enough to do something important. You proved that is bullshit and people need to know it. Dixon nodded in agreement. He is right. What you did changes the conversation. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. They sat in silence for several minutes, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise through the dining facility windows. Maya thought about the night's events. The decisions made in seconds with incomplete information. The feel of the Huey's controls in her hands as she pushed the dying helicopter past its limits. The weight of knowing that 7 lives depended on her getting it right. She thought about Brennan, the SEAL who had not made it out. His body was still at the crash site, waiting for a recovery team. That death would stay with her. Not because she could have prevented it, but because she could not. Some things were beyond fixing, no matter how skilled you were or how hard you tried. Hoskins entered the dining facility with 2 other SEALs from Garrett's team. They saw Maya and changed direction to approach her table. Hoskins extended his hand. Heard what you did, Torres. That took guts. Maya shook his hand, remembering his comment from the day before, about leaving the real operations to the operators. He seemed to remember it too, because his expression carried something that might have been embarrassment or respect, or both. I was wrong about you, he said. We all were. You are one hell of an operator, whether you were a Trident or not. The other SEALs nodded in agreement. One of them was the senior chief, Brennan's closest friend on the team. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his voice was rough when he spoke. You got our boys out. That is all that matters. Thank you. Maya felt something tighten in her chest. These were the men who had dismissed her as just a mechanic, who had walked past her platform, making jokes about leaving the real work to the operators. And now they stood in front of her offering thanks and respect. It should have felt like vindication, but mostly it just felt sad. Sad that it had taken a crisis and a death for them to see what should have been obvious all along. Dixon stood. "Come on, Torres. You need sleep before you fall over." Maya let him guide her out of the dining facility. The sun was fully up now. Another day beginning in a place where days blurred together into an endless cycle of missions and maintenance and moments of chaos. She thought about going back to her quarters and trying to sleep, but knew her mind would not let her rest. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Instead, she walked to the flight line and stood looking at the rows of aircraft. Blackhawks and Chinooks and little birds. All of them machines that could kill you if you did not respect them. All of them tools that saved lives when used correctly. She had spent her entire career maintaining these aircraft, keeping them flying, making sure they were ready when people needed them. And for one night, she had been more than just a mechanic. She had been the mission. Maya finally made it to her quarters around 0600. She stripped off her filthy flight suit and stood under the lukewarm shower until the water ran clear. Her shoulder hurt where the round had grazed her, a shallow furrow across the muscle that would heal without stitches. She had not even noticed it until now. Adrenaline was funny that way. She lay down on her rack and stared at the ceiling, her mind refusing to settle despite her body's exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw tracer fire and instrument panels and the faces of Garrett's team as they climbed aboard the Huey. She saw Brennan's empty seat in the cargo bay. The math was simple. 7 saved, 1 lost. But the math did not make the loss feel any lighter. Sleep finally came sometime after 0700. When she woke, it was past noon, and someone was knocking on her door. She pulled on a clean uniform and opened it to find a specialist she did not recognize holding a clipboard. "Staff Sergeant Torres, you're wanted at the TOC. Colonel Henderson is inbound from division headquarters and wants to speak with you." Maya rubbed her face. "When?" "Now," the specialist said apologetically. The Tactical Operations Center was busy when Maya arrived. Officers and NCOs moved between workstations, coordinating the dozens of missions and operations that kept the FOB functioning. She had rarely been in this building. Mechanics did not usually raid access to the nerve center of base operations. A captain she did not know directed her to a small conference room. "Wait here. The colonel will be with you shortly." Maya sat at the table and waited. Through the window, she could see helicopters on the flight line, mechanics working on various aircraft. Her crew would be handling the maintenance workload without her today. She wondered if anyone had bothered to finish the fuel system repair on the original bird that had started this whole chain of events. The door opened, and Colonel Henderson entered. He was in his late 40s with the lean build of someone who still met physical fitness standards through discipline rather than genetics. Behind him came Reeves, and a Major Maya recognized as the battalion legal officer. This was not going to be a friendly conversation. Henderson sat across from her. "Staff Sergeant Torres, I have spent the morning reviewing reports about last night's unauthorized mission. I have statements from Captain Reeves, Chief Warrant Officer Dixon, Lieutenant Commander Garrett, and several others. I have also reviewed your personnel file and service record." He paused. "Help me understand your thinking." Maya chose her words carefully. "Sir, I assessed that Lieutenant Commander Garrett and his team were in imminent danger with no viable rescue option available through standard channels. I had the skills and resources to attempt a rescue. I made the decision to act. Without authorization, without clearance, without backup or support." "Correct, sir." Henderson leaned back in his chair. "You understand that what you did violates regulations regarding aircraft operations, chain of command, and rules of engagement. The legal officer here tells me we have grounds for multiple charges, including theft of government property, unauthorized flight operations, and disobedience of orders." "I understand, sir. But Lieutenant Commander Garrett tells me you saved his life and the lives of 6 of his teammates. He is recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. I have 3 other SEALs who submitted statements supporting that recommendation." Henderson tapped the folder in front of him. "That puts me in an interesting position." Maya said nothing. She had learned long ago that when senior officers started talking about interesting positions, The best response was to keep your mouth shut and let them work through it. The colonel looked at Reeves. Captain, your assessment? Reeves shifted in his seat. Staff Sergeant Torres acted outside her authority and violated regulations. However, her assessment of the tactical situation was correct. Standard rescue protocols were failing. Her actions, while unauthorized, achieved the mission objective with no additional casualties. He paused. I believe the appropriate response is administrative counseling and a letter of reprimand in her permanent file. Henderson turned to the legal officer. Major? The major flipped through his notes. From a purely legal standpoint, we could pursue charges, but the optics would be problematic. Prosecuting a soldier for successfully rescuing SEALs would generate significant negative attention. Additionally, the defense would argue necessity and the reasonableness of her actions given the circumstances. He closed his folder. My recommendation is non-judicial punishment under Article 15. Reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, and formal reprimand. Henderson considered this. Then he looked at Maya. What do you think should happen, Staff Sergeant? Maya met his eyes. Sir, I think you should do whatever you need to do to maintain good order and discipline. I knew I was breaking regulations when I took that helicopter. I accept the consequences, but I would make the same decision again if faced with the same circumstances. Even knowing you would face punishment? Even knowing that, sir. Because 7 men would be dead otherwise, and I am not sure regulations matter much to dead men. Henderson almost smiled at that. You realize that attitude is exactly what got you into this situation. Yes, sir. I do. The colonel stood and walked to the window, looking out the flight line. I have been in the Army for 26 years, he said. I have seen a lot of soldiers make a lot of decisions. Some good, some bad, most somewhere in between. What you did last night was probably the most tactically sound violation of regulations I have ever encountered. He turned back to face her, which creates a problem for me. I cannot condone what you did, but I also cannot ignore the results. Henderson returned to his seat. Here is what is going to happen. You will receive a written reprimand for unauthorized flight operations that goes in your file and follows you for the rest of your career. You will also receive a formal commendation for valor and a recommendation for the Distinguished Fly Cross. Both things will be true, and both things will be in your record. The Army can decide later which one matters more. Maya nodded. Understood, sir. Additionally, Henderson continued, I am reassigning you to a new position. We are standing up a specialized maintenance and operations team focused on high-risk equipment recovery and technical support for special operations. You will lead that team. Your experience last night demonstrated skills we need in that role. Reeves looked surprised. Sir, with respect, Staff Sergeant Torres is a conventional mechanic. She does not have special operations training or clearance. She does now. Henderson slid a folder across the table. Your clearance upgrade paperwork is already in process, Torres. You will attend an abbreviated Special Operations Familiarization course starting next month. After that, you will work directly with SEAL teams and other Special Operations units, providing maintenance and technical support. He paused. You wanted to be more than just a mechanic. Congratulations. You got your wish. Maya took the folder, her mind trying to process what had just happened. She had expected punishment, maybe even a court-martial. Instead, she was being promoted to a position she did not even know existed. Questions? Henderson asked. Just one, sir. Why? Because last night you proved that the line between support personnel and combat operators is artificial. You demonstrated tactical thinking, technical expertise, and courage under fire. Those are exactly the qualities we need in personnel supporting special operations. The colonel stood. You are dismissed. Report to your new unit tomorrow morning. Captain Reeves will provide you the details. Maya stood and saluted. The officers returned it, and she left the conference room in a daze. Outside the TOC, she stopped and leaned against the wall, tried to process everything that had just happened. Punishment and commendation. Reprimand and promotion. The Army had managed to simultaneously discipline her and reward her for the same actions. Dixon found her there 20 minutes later. Heard you survived the meeting with Henderson. Barely. Maya showed him the folder. Apparently, I am leading a new technical support team for special operations. Dixon grinned. Told you people were starting to see you differently. You just did not expect it to happen this fast. I expected a court-martial, not a job offer. The Warren officer shrugged. Army does not know what to do with people who do not fit in the boxes. So they make new boxes. Congratulations on becoming your own box. They walked together toward the dining facility. The afternoon sun beat down on the compound. Another day in an endless string of days. But something had shifted. Maya could feel it in the way people looked at her as she passed. Word had spread about the rescue, about the mechanic who flew into a combat zone and brought back a SEAL team. Some people would see that as heroic. Others would see it as reckless. But nobody would see her as just a mechanic anymore. She thought about what Henderson had said. The line between support personnel and combat operators is artificial. Maybe that was true. Maybe the only real lines were the ones people drew in their own minds about what was possible and who could do what. She had spent 8 years accepting those lines as real. Last night, she had erased them. The next morning, Maya reported to Building 7, a nondescript structure on the far side of the FOB that she had barely noticed before. The sign outside read Technical Support Detachment. Inside, she found a small team of specialists waiting for her. 2 mechanics, a communications technician, and a Warren officer who introduced himself as Chief Miller. Miller was older than Dixon, probably close to retirement, with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades making broken things work in impossible conditions. He shook Maya's hand firmly. Heard about your little adventure. Hell of a way to get assigned to this unit. Was not exactly my plan, Maya said. Best assignments never are. Miller gestured to the others. This is your team. We provide maintenance and technical support for special operations across the region. Equipment recovery, field repairs, improvise solutions when standard procedures do not work. Basically, we do what you did the other night, but with authorization and better planning. One of the mechanics, a sergeant named Park, stepped forward. We have been reading your file. For years as a crew chief in Afghanistan. 800 flight hours. Multiple combat deployments. Why were you wasting time as a conventional mechanic? Maya shrugged. Because that was my job. Nobody asked if I could do more. Well, now we are asking, Miller said. We have a mission brief in 30 minutes. SEAL Team 5 is planning an operation that requires helicopter insertion into terrain our standard birds cannot handle. They want technical assessment and recommendations. That is you. The briefing room was already full when they arrived. Maya recognized several faces from Garrett's team, including Hoskins. A new SEAL officer stood at the front, a lieutenant commander named Pierce. He looked young for his rank, probably fast-tracked through the promotion system based on performance rather than time in service. Pierce started without preamble. We have intelligence on a high-value target in the mountain region 70 kilometers northeast of here. Terrain is extremely rough with narrow valleys and limited landing zones. Our standard Black Hawks cannot operate effectively at that altitude with full combat load. He pulled up a map on the screen. We need options. Maya studied the map. She could see the problem immediately. The target was at an elevation that would push helicopters to their performance limits. High-density altitude meant reduced lift capacity. The narrow valleys meant limited approach corridors. One wrong decision, and a helicopter could find itself trapped with no room to maneuver. What is the combat load? She asked. 12 personnel plus équipement. Roughly 4,000 pounds total. And you want to insert and extract at the target location? Correct. Pierce looked at her. Lieutenant Commander Garrett said, "You're the best person to tell us if this is possible." Maya walked to the map and traced the terrain features with her finger. Standard Black Hawk at this altitude with that load is marginal at best. You have maybe 10% power margin, which means no room for error. If you take any battle damage or lose an engine, you're going down. So it cannot be done? I did not say that. She pulled up performance charts on her tablet and ran calculations. If we strip non-essential equipment and reduce fuel load to mission minimum, we could get the weight down to acceptable margins. But you will need experienced pilots who understand high-altitude operations. And you will need a backup plan if things go wrong. Miller nodded approvingly. She is right. This is doable, but risky. We should plan for contingencies. Pierce considered this. What kind of contingencies? Maya pointed to the map. If you take damage on the way in or cannot land at the primary location, you need alternate landing zones downslope where the aircraft has better performance. I recommend identifying 3 alternates at progressively lower elevations. She zoomed in on the target area. Also consider splitting the team between 2 birds. Reduces individual aircraft weight and gives you redundancy if one goes down. That changes our tactics significantly, Hoskins said. We usually operate as a single team. Your tactics are based on normal operational environments. This is not normal. Maya met his eyes. You can either adapt your tactics to the terrain or watch your helicopter struggle at the edge of its performance envelope. Your choice. The room was silent for a moment. Then Pierce nodded. Okay, we split the team and identify alternate LZs. What else? You need me on one of the helicopters? The SEAL officer frowned. Why? Because if something breaks in flight, I can assess the problem and potentially fix it before it becomes catastrophic. I can also advise the pilots on performance limitations in real time based on what the aircraft is actually doing rather than what the book says it should do. Miller spoke up. She's right. Having a mechanic aboard for high-risk insertions is standard procedure for us. Torres has the experience and the clearance now. She goes. Pierce exchanged glances with Hoskins. Then he nodded. Fine. You fly with Team 1. Mission is in 72 hours. We will coordinate training and final planning between now and then. The briefing continued for another hour, working through details and contingencies. Maya found herself contributing more than she had expected, her knowledge of aircraft systems and performance intersecting with tactical planning in ways that surprised even her. The SEALs listened when she spoke, asking questions and incorporating her recommendations into their plan. It was a different experience from being dismissed as just a mechanic. After the briefing, Garrett approached her. He was still wearing the sling, but looked better than he had the day before. Heard about your new assignment. Congratulations. Thank you. Maya gestured at his arm. How long before you are back to full duty? 6 weeks minimum. I will miss this mission, but my team is in good hands with Pierce. He paused. They're taking you seriously now. The team. The command. Everyone. That is what you wanted, right? I wanted to do my job without people assuming I could not handle more than turning wrenches. Maya looked around the briefing room at the maps and equipment and personnel. I guess I got what I wanted. Just not the way I expected. That is usually how it works. Garrett extended his good hand. Thank you again. For the rescue. For proving that support personnel are just as capable as operators when given the chance. You changed some minds, Torres. Including mine. Maya shook his hand. Just doing what needed to be done. Yeah, but most people do not. That is what makes it worth recognizing. She watched him leave, his words settling into her thoughts. Most people do not. She had spent 8 years watching people stay in their lanes, following protocols, accepting limitations that were more about bureaucracy than actual capability. Last night, she had refused to accept those limitations, and 7 men were alive because of it. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that she was special or exceptional, but that most people never tested the boundaries of what was possible. Over the next 3 days, Maya worked with Pierce's team preparing for the mission. They flew practice runs at lower elevations, rehearsing insertions and extractions until everyone knew their role. She spent hours with the pilots discussing performance margins and emergency procedures. She inspected every bolt and rivet on both helicopters, making sure nothing would fail when they needed it most. The night before the mission, she stood on the flight line, watching the sun set. The 2 Black Hawks sat ready on the pad, pre-flighted and fueled for the morning launch. Everything that could be checked had been checked. Everything that could be planned had been planned. Now it was just a matter of execution. Dixon found her there as darkness fell. Big day tomorrow. Yeah, Maya did not take her eyes off the helicopters. First mission with the new team. First time flying with SEALs as part of the mission rather than just supporting it. I would be lying if I said I was not nervous. Nervous is good. Keeps you sharp. Dixon stood beside her. You know what is interesting? 3 days ago, you were a mechanic nobody took seriously. Now you're mission essential personnel for a special operations raid. That is a hell of a transformation. Maybe. Or maybe I was always mission essential and people just did not realize it. Fair point. Dixon turned to leave, then stopped. Torres? Try not to make a habit of unauthorized rescues. Once is heroic. Twice is a pattern, and the Army hates patterns. Maya smiled. I will keep that in mind. She stayed on the flight line until the stars came out, thinking about the mission and what came after. Henderson had told her she was leading a new team. Garrett had said she changed minds. Miller had welcomed her to a unit where her skills actually mattered. It all felt surreal, like she had stepped through a door into a different version of her career. But underneath the surrealism was something solid. She had proved she could do more than maintain aircraft. She had proved she could fly them in combat. She had proved she could make tactical decisions under pressure. Those proofs would follow her now, opening doors that had been closed before. Tomorrow she would fly with SEALs into mountain terrain that pushed helicopters to their limits. She would advise pilots and monitor systems and be ready to fix whatever broke. And if things went wrong, she would do whatever needed to be done to bring everyone home. Just like before. Just like always. That was the job now. Not just fixing helicopters, but being part of the mission. Not just supporting operations, but executing them. She had crossed the line, and there was no going back. The Blackhawks launched at 0400 under a moonless sky. Maya sat in the crew chief position of the lead aircraft, headset on, watching the instrument panel over the pilot's shoulders. Pierce and 5 of his SEALs occupied the cargo bay behind her, their equipment secured and weapons ready. The second helicopter flew 300 meters to their right, carrying Hoskins and the rest of the team. The flight into the mountains took 40 minutes. Maya monitored the engine gauges as they climbed, watching the turbine temperatures rise as the air thinned. The pilots were good, maintaining optimal airspeed and power settings to conserve fuel and performance margin. But she could feel the helicopter working harder with each 1,000 feet of elevation gained. At 12,000 feet, the density altitude was pushing 15,000. The Blackhawks' performance was noticeably degraded, the controls mushy and the climb rate reduced to a crawl. Maya checked her calculations against the actual conditions. They were right at the edge of the performance envelope, but still within acceptable limits. 5 minutes to target, the pilot announced over the intercom. Maya leaned forward to study the terrain ahead. The valley narrowed dramatically, rocky walls rising on both sides. The primary landing zone was a small plateau near the target compound, barely large enough for one helicopter. The second bird would have to hold in orbit while the first team inserted. She keyed her mic recommend we slow to 80 knots. Ground effect will be minimal at this altitude, so we need every bit of margin we can get. The pilot nodded and reduced airspeed. The helicopter settled into a more stable flight regime, trading speed for better control. Maya watched the torque gauge climb as the pilot increased collective to maintain altitude. They were using 70% available power just to stay level. That left 30% for landing and maneuvering. It would be enough, but not by much. The plateau appeared ahead, a flat area carved into the mountainside, surrounded by rocky outcroppings. The compound sat at the far end, a cluster of stone buildings that looked centuries old. No lights, no visible movement. Intelligence said the target was inside, but intelligence had been wrong before. Lead is inbound hot, the pilot transmitted. Cover maintain orbit south. The second helicopter acknowledged and peeled away. Maya felt the lead bird decelerate as the pilot began his approach to the plateau. The helicopter shuddered in the turbulent air, mountain winds creating unpredictable gusts that required constant control inputs. She watched the pilots work, their hands never still as they fought to maintain stable flight. 100 feet above the plateau, the helicopter suddenly dropped. A downdraft had caught them, pushing the aircraft toward the rocky surface faster than the pilot could compensate. He pulled collective, but the response was sluggish. They were too heavy and the air too thin for rapid maneuvering. Power, Maya called out. You need more power now. The pilot pulled more collective and the turbine responded, but the drop continued. 50 feet, 40 feet. The helicopter was descending too fast for a controlled landing. Maya's mind raced through options. If they hit hard, they could damage the landing gear or worse. But if the pilot pulled too much power, trying to arrest the descent, he could over-torque the engine. Cyclic forward, she said. Trade altitude for airspeed, then flare hard. The pilot pushed the cyclic forward and the helicopter's nose dropped. Airspeed increased as they traded falling for forward motion. At 30 feet, he pulled back hard on the cyclic and the aircraft flared, trading the airspeed for lift. The descent rate slowed. 20 feet, 10 feet. The skids touched down harder than ideal, but controlled. They were on the ground. Good call, Torres, the pilot said, his voice tight. Pierce and his team were already moving, flowing out of the cargo bay with practiced efficiency. Maya watched them establish security around the helicopter while the pilots kept the rotors turning. The plan was for a quick extract. Get the target and get out before anyone noticed they were there. The second helicopter moved into position for its approach. Maya watched through night vision as it descended toward the plateau. The pilot was being more cautious after seeing what happened to the lead bird, coming in slower and more controlled. The helicopter settled onto the plateau 50 meters away, and Hoskins' team deployed. Both teams moved toward the compound. Maya stayed with the aircraft, monitoring the engine gauges. The turbine temperature was elevated from the high-power landing, but still within limits. She made a note to check the engine after they returned to base. Running at these altitudes put stress on components that could lead to premature wear. The radio crackled. "Led, this is ground team. We have eyes on target building preparing to breach." Maya, Keeter might copy that. "Be advised we are at 65% fuel. Recommend expediting mission timeline." "Understood. Stand by." She watched the SEALs move through her night vision. They stacked up at the compound entrance, weapons ready. The lead man breached the door, and the team flowed inside. For 3 minutes, there was silence. Then gunfire erupted from the building, muzzle flashes visible through the windows. The radio came alive with terse commands and situation reports. "Contact. Multiple hostiles engaged. Target located." Maya felt tension coil in her chest. Firefights in close quarters were unpredictable. Things could go wrong fast. The pilots were tense beside her, hands on the controls ready to lift off if the situation deteriorated. More gunfire. Then silence. The radio crackled again. "Led, this is ground team. We have the package, and 2 EPWs moving to extract now." The SEALs emerged from the compound at a run, 2 prisoners in flexi cuffs being hustled along by the operators. Pierce's team loaded into the lead helicopter while Hoskins' team loaded into the second. Maya did a quick head count. Everyone accounted for plus the target and prisoners. Clean extraction. Both aircraft lifting, the pilot transmitted. The Blackhawk spooled up to full power and lifted off the plateau. Maya watched the torque gauge peg at 90%. They were carrying more weight now with the prisoners, and they were still at high altitude. The helicopter climbed sluggishly, barely maintaining positive rate of climb. Then she saw it. A wisp of smoke from the number 2 engine. Not much, but enough to be visible in the darkness. She checked the gauges. Turbine temperature spiking. Oil pressure dropping slightly. Something was wrong. "We have a problem," she said. "Number 2 engine is running hot and showing signs of distress." The pilot checked his instruments. "I see it. Temperature is climbing into the yellow. Can you determine cause?" Maya unbuckled and moved to the engine access panel. She could see the problem immediately. A hydraulic line had developed a leak, probably from the stress of the high-power landing. Hot hydraulic fluid was spraying onto the hot engine cowling, creating smoke and raising temperatures. If the line failed completely, they could lose hydraulic pressure to critical flight controls. "Hydraulic leak on number 2, she reported. "Recommend we reduce power on that engine and increase power on number 1 to compensate." The pilot made the adjustment and the temperature stabilized. But now they were flying asymmetrically with reduced power available. The helicopter's performance degraded further. They were maintaining altitude, but barely, and the torque gauge on the number 1 engine showed they were using almost all available power. "We need to descend," the pilot said. Get into denser air where we have better performance. Maya checked their position. They were still over the mountains with steep terrain on all sides. Descending meant following the valley down, which added distance and time. But staying at this altitude meant risking complete hydraulic failure. Descend, she agreed. Follow the valley. I will monitor the hydraulic system and give you warning if we are about to lose it completely. The helicopter nosed down and began following the valley floor. The descent gave them better air density and improved performance. Maya kept one eye on the leaking hydraulic line and one eye on the gauges. The leak was steady, but not getting worse. They might make it. Pierce appeared beside her. What is our status? We have a hydraulic leak that is reducing our redundancy. If the line fails completely, we lose backup hydraulics to the flight controls. The bird will still fly, but with reduced safety margins. How long until failure? Unknown. Could be 5 minutes. Could be 50. I am watching it. Pierce nodded and moved back to brief his team. Maya returned her attention to the engine. The valley was opening up ahead as they lost altitude. 8,000 feet. 7,000. The helicopter's performance improved with each 1,000 feet of descent. The pilots relaxed slightly as their control authority increased. 6,000 feet, and the second helicopter called in. Lead, this is 2. We are seeing similar issues on our number 1 engine. Hydraulic system showing anomalies. Copy 2. Both birds compromised. We need to get on the ground soon. Maya Keeter Mike. There's a valley floor settlement 12 kilometers ahead. Flat ground, good approaches. Recommend we land there and assess damage before continuing to base. Agreed. Both aircraft diverting to valley floor LZ. They reached the settlement 15 minutes later, a small village with fields surrounding it. The helicopters landed in an empty field and the pilots shut down. Maya was out before the rotors stopped spinning, tool bag in hand. She inspected both aircraft and found the same problem on each. Hydraulic lines stressed by the high-altitude operations had developed leaks. Fixable, but not without parts and time. She briefed Pierce and the pilots. We need replacement hydraulic lines and fluid. I can patch these temporarily, but they will not hold for sustained flight. We need parts brought in, or we need to wait here while I do proper repairs with what we have. How long for temporary repairs? 2 hours, maybe 3, but I'm not confident they will hold all the way back to base. And proper repairs? 6 hours minimum. Longer if I have complications. Pierce considered the options. He looked at his team, at the prisoners, at the helicopters sitting silent in the field. Then he made the call. We do proper repairs. Better to spend the time here than crash halfway home. Torres, you have 6 hours. We will establish security and coordinate with base for support. Maya worked through the morning heat with single-minded focus. She had both engine cowlings open and was systematically replacing the damaged hydraulic lines with spares from the helicopter's emergency kits. The work required precision and patience, threading new lines through tight spaces while ensuring proper routing and clearance. One mistake, and the repair would fail in flight, with potentially catastrophic results. Park, her fellow mechanic from the technical support team, had arrived on a support helicopter an hour after they landed. He brought additional parts and tools, setting up a field maintenance station in the shade of one of the Black Hawks. Together, they tackled both aircraft simultaneously, coordinating their efforts to complete the repairs as quickly as possible without sacrificing quality. The pilots watched them work, occasionally asking questions, but mostly staying out of the way. Maya appreciated that. Some pilots insisted on supervising maintenance like they knew better than the mechanics. These pilots understood that their expertise ended where hers began. She was torquing down a fitting on the second helicopter when one of the pilots approached, the one who had almost put them into the ground during the approach to the plateau. His name was Captain Warren, and his face carried the stress of someone replaying a bad landing in his mind. Torres, he said, about earlier. That approach. I should have anticipated the downdraft better. Should have maintained more power in reserve. Maya did not stop working. You did fine. Mountain flying is unforgiving, and we were at the edge of performance limits. The fact that we got down at all is a credit to your skill. Your call to trade altitude for airspeed saved us. I froze for a second, trying to decide whether to add power or abort. You made the decision before I could. That is why I was there. Fresh eyes and technical knowledge. I could see what the helicopter was doing and what it needed. She finished torquing the fitting and checked her work. You executed the recovery perfectly once you had the information. That is good piloting. Warren nodded slowly. The other pilots, the ones who have been flying for years, they tell stories about old crew chiefs who could read a helicopter better than the instruments. I always thought that was exaggerated. But you really can feel what the aircraft is doing, can't you? 800 hours in these birds. Most of it in bad conditions. You learn to listen to what the helicopter is telling you. She moved to the next fitting. Right now, this one is telling me it needs new hydraulic lines, and then it will be ready to fly again. The pilot smiled slightly. How long? Another hour. Maybe 90 minutes. Then we test the systems, and if everything checks out, we go home. Good. Warren looked back at the helicopter. Thank you for being there, for knowing what to do. Makes me feel better knowing someone that competent is watching the systems. Maya glanced at him. 3 days ago, you would not have wanted a mechanic in your cockpit. 3 days ago, I did not know mechanics could do what you do. Warren paused. Hell, 3 days ago, I did not think anyone could do what you did. Flying into a hot LZ in a civilian bird to extract a surrounded team? That is the kind of thing people talk about for years. Let us hope they also talk about how we completed this mission without crashing. That would be a nice addition to the story. Fair point. Warren headed back to where Pierce had established the Tactical Operations Center. Maya returned to her work, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through the familiar motions of aircraft maintenance. By early afternoon, both helicopters were reassembled. Maya ran through system checks methodically, testing hydraulic pressure, checking for leaks, verifying that all control surfaces responded properly. Park did the same on the second bird. Everything looked good, but field repairs were always questionable until tested under actual flight conditions. She found Pierce studying a map with Hoskins. Systems check complete. Both aircraft are ready for test flights. Hoskins looked up. You are confident they will hold? As confident as I can be without actually flying them. We replaced all the damaged lines and verified system integrity. But the only way to know for sure is to get them in the air and see how they perform. Pierce folded his map. Then let us do that. Warren, get your bird up and run through a full test sequence. If it holds, we start loading for return flight. The test flight took 30 minutes. Warren put the helicopter through its paces, testing performance at various altitudes and power settings. Maya monitored from the ground via radio, listening to his reports on system performance. Everything was nominal. The second helicopter tested equally well. The repairs had held. Loading took another 30 minutes. The SEALs secured the prisoners and equipment while Maya did final pre-flight checks. She found herself moving between both aircraft, double-checking fittings and connections, making sure nothing had been missed. Park caught her on her third inspection of the same hydraulic line. It is good, Torres. You did it right the first time. Stop second-guessing yourself. Maya lowered her flashlight. Just making sure. You always make sure. That is why you're good at this. But at some point, you have to trust your work and launch. Park gestured at the helicopters. These birds are ready. The team is ready. Time to go home. She knew he was right. The inspections were becoming compulsive, driven more by anxiety than necessity. She had done the work correctly. The systems had tested clean. Continuing to check and recheck would not make the repairs any better. Both aircraft launched 20 minutes later. Maya rode in the lead bird again, position where she could monitor the engine gauges and hydraulic systems. The flight back was uneventful, the repaired lines holding steady as the helicopters climbed out of the valley and turned west toward the FOB. Pierce sat across from her, the captured target secured beside him. The SEAL officer had been quiet since they loaded up, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke over the rotor noise. Miller told me about your background. Crew chief in Afghanistan. Multiple combat deployments. 800 hours. Why were you not doing this kind of work before? Maya shrugged. Nobody asked. I was a mechanic, so I fixed helicopters. That was the job. But you knew you could do more. Knowing and getting the chance are different things. The Army puts you in a box, and most people stay there because that is easier than fighting to get out. You fought to get out. Not really. I just did what needed to be done when the situation required it. Getting out of the box was a side effect. Pierce considered this. Garrett said something similar, that you did not see yourself as doing anything special, just solving problems as they appeared. That is basically maintenance work in a nutshell. Things break. You fix them. Sometimes the things that break are missions instead of helicopters, but the principle is the same. The SEAL officer smiled. That is a hell of a way to look at combat operations. Just another maintenance problem. Is it wrong? No. Pierce shook his head. Actually, it is probably the most practical perspective I have heard. Most operators overcomplicate things with tactics and doctrine. Sometimes the answer is just to identify what is broken and fix it with whatever tools you have available. Maya looked out the cargo door at the terrain passing below. The mountains were behind them now, replaced by rolling desert that stretched to the horizon. Another 30 minutes, and they would be back at the FOB. Back to the maintenance bay and the daily routine of keeping aircraft flying. Except her routine had changed. She was not just a mechanic anymore. She was part of a specialized team that operated at the intersection of technical expertise and tactical operations. Hoskins appeared from the rear of the cargo bay. He sat down next to Pierce. How are the systems holding? Maya checked the gauges. Solid. No anomalies. The repairs are good. Hoskins nodded. That was impressive work back there. Field repairs under time pressure with limited resources. Not many mechanics could have pulled that off. I had good training and good parts. The rest is just knowing the systems well enough to work efficiently. You know, Hoskins said when Garrett first told me about assigning you to this team, I had my doubts. Thought it was a political move. Making a statement about supporting diversity in special operations or some bureaucratic nonsense. He paused. I was wrong. You are here because you are the best person for the job. Nothing political about it. Maya met his eyes. Appreciate you saying that. Just the truth. Hoskins stood and returned to the rear of the helicopter. Pierce watched him go, then looked back at Maya. That is high praise from Hoskins. He does not give compliments easily. I noticed. The rest of the flight passed in comfortable silence. Maya monitored the instruments while the SEALs prepared for arrival. When the FOB appeared on the horizon, she felt something settle in her chest. They had completed the mission, extracted the target, brought everyone home safely, and she had been an integral part of making it happen. The helicopters landed smoothly on the primary pad. The SEALs offloaded their equipment and prisoners while Maya conducted post-flight inspections. Everything looked good. The hydraulic repairs had held perfectly. In a few hours, she would do more detailed inspections and write up her maintenance reports. But for now, the mission was complete. Dixon was waiting at the edge of the flight line. He watched her climb down from the helicopter. How'd it go? Maya pulled off her helmet. We had hydraulic failures at altitude. Had to land and conduct field repairs. Took 6 hours, but we got it done. Of course you did. Dixon smiled. Henderson is going to want a full brief. Probably another meeting where they decide whether to punish you or promote you. As long as they let me keep working on helicopters, I do not care which. That is what I like about you, Torres. You actually mean that. Most people would be angling for the promotion. You just want to do the job. Maya looked back at the Black Hawks sitting on the pad, their rotors still spinning down. The job was what mattered. Everything else was just paperwork. The awards ceremony happened 3 weeks later. Maya stood in formation with the rest of the technical support detachment, dress uniform pressed and boots polished, while Colonel Henderson read citations and pinned medals on various personnel. When her turn came, she marched forward and stood at attention while Henderson described her actions during the unauthorized rescue of Garrett's team. The Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres distinguished herself by heroism while serving as pilot in command during a combat search and rescue operation. Despite lacking formal authorization and facing intense enemy fire, Staff Sergeant Torres successfully extracted 7 personnel from a hostile landing zone, demonstrating exceptional courage and technical expertise under extreme conditions. Henderson pinned the medal to her uniform. Then he leaned in and spoke quietly. You earned this. Whatever else happens in your career, remember that. Thank you, sir. She returned to formation and the ceremony continued. When it ended, people approached to offer congratulations. Some were genuine. Others felt obligatory. Maya accepted both with the same polite acknowledgement. The medal was not why she had flown that mission, but she understood its purpose. Henderson had been right weeks ago. The recognition was not just for her. It was for everyone who came after. Garrett found her after the formation broke up. He was out of the sling now, his arm healing well. He shook her hand firmly. Well-deserved, Torres. You saved my life and the lives of my men. I will not forget that. How is the team doing? Back in the States, running training cycles. They will deploy again in a few months. Different mission, different location, but same work. He paused. Hoskins asked me to pass along his regards. Said you were the real deal, and he hoped you would be around for their next deployment. I will be here. This is where the work is. That is what Miller said you would say. Garrett smiled. You really do not care about the recognition, do you? It is nice to be acknowledged, but the work matters more than the awards. Maya looked across the compound at the flight line. Those helicopters need maintenance whether I have a medal or not. The missions continue whether people remember who kept the aircraft flying or not. That is the nature of the job. Most people would use this recognition as a stepping stone, leverage it into a better position or easier assignment. I already have a better position. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. Why would I leave that for something easier? Garrett considered her words. You are an unusual person, Torres. I mean that as a compliment. They talked for a few more minutes. Then Garrett left to catch a flight back to his team. Maya returned to the technical support detachment building where her team was preparing for the next mission. Miller had intelligence on a downed aircraft in disputed territory. They were planning a recovery operation to extract sensitive equipment before hostile forces could reach it. Park was already running scenarios on the computer when Maya arrived. He looked up from his screen. How was the ceremony? Standard. Speeches and formations and people being polite. Did Henderson give you the speech about being a role model and setting an example? Briefly. Park grinned. He gave me the same speech when I got my Bronze Star. Apparently high performers are supposed to inspire others through their example. Makes us sound like motivational posters. Maybe that is the point. Maya pulled up a chair and looked at his computer screen. What do we have on the recovery operation? Park walked her through the details. The downed aircraft was an intelligence collection platform that had experienced mechanical failure and crash-landed in a remote area. Enemy forces were known to be operating in the region, but had not yet reached the crash site. The mission was to insert a recovery team, extract critical equipment, and destroy what could not be removed. Standard procedure for sensitive aircraft. Timeline? Maya asked. 48 hours. Weather is deteriorating, and we lose our window after that. Miller wants you leading the technical assessment team. You will fly in with the recovery force and determine what can be extracted and what needs to be destroyed in place. Maya studied the mission parameters. The insertion point was less challenging than a mountain operation, but the timeline was tight. They would need to work efficiently. Who else is going? Miller, you, me, and Specialist Chun from Communications, plus a security element from the Ranger Battalion. 12 personnel total across 2 helicopters. Equipment load? Cutting torches, demolition charges, tool kits, and recovery harnesses. Standard package for aircraft salvage. Park pulled up equipment lists. We are running heavy, but within acceptable load limits. They spent the next 2 days preparing for the mission. Maya inspected both helicopters personally, checking every system and component. She had learned from the mountain operation that high-stress missions revealed weaknesses in aircraft that routine flights never exposed. Better to find problems on the ground than discover them in flight. The morning of the mission, she stood on the flight line, watching the sunrise. The helicopters were ready. The team was ready. Everything that could be prepared had been prepared. Now it was just execution. Miller appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one. Nervous? Always a little. Keeps me sharp. Good answer. Miller sipped his coffee. You know what I like about you, Torres? You do not overthink things. You assess the situation, identify the solution, and execute. No drama, no hesitation, just competent work. That is how I was trained. Helicopters do not care about your feelings or your doubts. They just need proper maintenance and skilled operation. True, but most mechanics never make the jump from maintaining to operating. You did. That takes something extra. Maya considered this. Maybe it just takes being in the right situation at the right time. If Garrett's team had not been pinned down, if the QRF had been able to reach them, I would still be a conventional mechanic turning wrenches on the flight line. But you were there, and you made the choice to act. Miller turned to face her. That is what separates people who do extraordinary things from people who watch them happen. The willingness to step up when the moment requires it. The loadmaster called out that they were ready to board. Maya finished her coffee and walked to the helicopter. She climbed into the crew chief position and buckled in, running through her pre-flight checks while the pilots started engines. The familiar whine of turbines spooling up. The vibration of rotors beginning to turn. The systematic progression from static machine to dynamic aircraft ready for flight. The mission proceeded smoothly. They reached the crash site, extracted the critical equipment, and destroyed the remaining airframe with demolition charges. 6 hours after launch, they were back at the FOB with mission complete and zero complications. It was the kind of operation that never made headlines because nothing went wrong. But those operations were just as important as the dramatic rescues. Maybe more important because they were the daily work that kept larger missions possible. Dixon found her that evening in the maintenance bay. She was completing paperwork on the day's flight, documenting systems performance and equipment status. He waited until she finished writing before speaking. Henderson wants to see you tomorrow. Something about your next assignment. Maya set down her pen. What kind of assignment? He did not say, but reading between the lines, I think they want to expand the technical support attachment. Make it a formal program across the theater. You would be involved in training and program development. That sounds like staff work. Meetings and PowerPoint presentations instead of actual missions. Probably some of that. Dixon leaned against the workbench. But it also means you would be building something. Creating a capability that did not exist before. Training other mechanics to do what you do. That has value too. Maya thought about this. She had never seen herself as a trainer or program developer. She was a mechanic who had learned to do more when circumstances required it. But maybe that experience was worth passing on. Maybe other mechanics were waiting for someone to show them that the lines between support and operations were more flexible than they appeared. I will talk to Henderson, she said. See what he has in mind. She finished her paperwork and walked out to the flight line. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Helicopters sat silent on their pads, waiting for tomorrow's missions. Mechanics worked under floodlights on various aircraft, conducting routine maintenance that kept the machines flying. This was the work, not the medals or the recognition or the special assignments. Just the daily effort of maintaining aircraft and executing missions. She had proven she could do more than turn wrenches, had proven she could fly and fight and make tactical decisions under pressure. But at the core, she was still a mechanic. Someone who fixed broken things and kept machines running when people needed them. Park appeared beside her. Miller says the next recovery mission is in 4 days. Some kind of technical intelligence collection on enemy equipment. You interested? Maya smiled. Always. That is why I am here. They walked back to the maintenance bay together. Tomorrow she would meet with Henderson about expanding the program. Next week there would be another mission. Next month something else. The work continued. The helicopters needed maintenance. The missions needed support. And she would be there, doing what she did best, proving with every flight that mechanics were more than people thought they were. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.